Jared from IONCINEMA.com speaking with the 2025 Screenwriter Lab folks. I have the pleasure of speaking or chatting with Katla Sólnes with Eruption, one of the 10 projects selected from a whopping 3,380 submissions. So congrats on getting into the labs, but also Eruption is also the recipient of the Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship, which means it includes some science elements, perhaps some sci-fi elements. So congratulations on those two acknowledgements.
Thank you.
I believe you started cutting your teeth on shorts before enrolling into Columbia. If you had to discuss with the arrival of spring, Make-A-Wish, Belnani, and the still in post Embla, what does your X-ray machine look like? What's the language that's being used? What's sort of like your curriculum that you've developed over the course of those short films?
Yeah, great question. I mean, really my first short that you mentioned with the arrival of spring, I'd done some small work prior to that was quite inconsequential and never went anywhere. But with the arrival of spring was sort of my big first short. And I was quite happy with it because it went, it won some awards and went to a few places because I think the budget was like $800 or something ridiculous. So, but what I find through all my work, because I've been reflecting on it, is I think it's quite elemental, and this sort of occurs accidentally. So, well, I mean, from some sort of inner, what am I saying? From, I think
you're from Iceland.
Yeah,
so it's sort of like we sort of expect it, like Bjork and everybody else.
Yeah, the landscape sort of becomes infused in everything I write inadvertently. But with the arrival of spring, I've always thought of it as sort of air. And then with Make-A-Wish Benoni is sort of earth. And then my third one, which has a very long title, which is Whim Rules the Child, Weather the Field, is water, because it's about the rising sea levels. And then my upcoming one, Embla, is fire. And we even got to burn down a house, which was sick.
Very Tarkovsky.
Yeah, very Tarkovsky. And we shot on film. So I think now that I've done the 4 elements, I'm hopefully ready to move on into my feature, which will hopefully use all of them.
I love that. So you're at the labs. It's something that takes place a half century back. Tell me the importance about setting this project during this specific time period.
Yeah, so the protagonist of the film is the wife of a renowned geologist, and she would have been born in 1937, and at the time that would have been, Iceland was the most poor country in Europe, very traditional, very repressed in many ways. And then in comes this student who would have been born, I guess, in the late 50s, who's very representative of early 70s, late 60s America. So she's, college campus, revolution, rock and roll, second wave feminism, that sort of thing. And I thought it was so interesting how these women are born 15 years apart, but they might as well have been born a century apart, and then they sort of challenge each other, and that's sort of the crux of the film in a way, and that becomes the protagonist's awakening. So that was one of the reasons I set it there. But then also the climax of the film happens around this real-life volcanic eruption that happened in the Westman Islands, which is a small island south of Iceland, but still a part of Iceland.
Okay.
And there, it was basically the most sort of tragic recent volcanic eruption in Iceland, because an entire community had to evacuate in the middle of the night, throw their things in boats and leave while their houses burned down. So it's very, very resonant now, of course. And half the people never came back. And I always found that it's such a horrifying event, but it's also the calamity of it is so awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
So that real-life event occurred in January '73. So that's why it's sort of set around that time. So it's both from a character perspective, but also just from a sort of dramatic setting perspective.
Hence the title, Eruption. Something happened there, but something's happening in these characters' lives as well.
Totally.
When it comes to the character set, the protagonist, maybe the antagonist that you just described, what are their backgrounds like, their flaws or their habits? I imagine if one's coming from like a post-Kent University type setting, pre-Peace and Love, they probably have you probably have like a template built for that character. Like, how do they look like, those two?
I mean, they are completely different, which is good, because of course conflict arises from the fact when people have completely different perspectives. But the protagonist, Elín, she is she's traditional, but I think she could have been very cool and intellectual, but that wasn't an option for her. And I think because she is naturally quite gifted, knowing that she hasn't really done anything with her life except for support her husband, I think makes her quite insecure. And, you know, the arrival of Jane sort of shakes her up in a way where first she, you know, she sort of reacts quite pettily, and because it's challenging to see someone that's sort of living your dream that you didn't even realize was something that you were able to do. And then Jane, I mean, when I picture her sort of just the ultimate cool girl. I mean, she is the type of person that's sort of been in and around all the interesting groups at college and has sort of infused herself and has become saturated with sort of the best of that time, you know. So that's the conflict that I'm sort of describing there, but I do think they have a lot in common. First of all, they both have a love of nature and a love of geology, but beyond that, I mean, they're both women with ambitions and, you know, that have a love of the earth and volcanoes and the stories behind that. So they have a lot of commonalities. It just takes them a while to discover them.
So maybe born a century apart, but maybe born milliseconds apart as well.
Exactly.
And I imagine this is going to be both in, it'll be dual language film,
yes,
which makes it much more interesting for cinephiles like me.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. And it's interesting as well because I've only ever done work in Iceland with Icelandic actors, but because I have this American character now, it's sort of exciting because, you know, the world's my oyster, because Icelandic actors are phenomenal, but, you know, there's not that many of them. The flora and fauna is quite limited, but now suddenly I have this drive to find the perfect Jane.
With regards to the look of the film, like I sort of like skimmed through your earlier work, so I get a potential, like I imagine you would want to shoot on 35 for something like this, but what are some reference points that I might find in your mood, your pitch deck or your mood board? Like,
oh yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, and that's really what I'm hoping to do, we would be shooting on, if not 35, I'd also be happy with 16 because it has a rough quality that I actually find very engaging, and also it is cheaper, so it might be more likely for the first feature. But with my references, it's funny you mentioned Tarkovsky before. I mean, everything he's done, and especially, you know, The Sacrifice, which is in Northern Europe, I am incredibly engaged by that, and he has such a way of poeticizing reality but also making it feel lived in, and, you know, it doesn't feel heightened or fantastical, and it has this quality like a memory, and I really resonate with that. And then Bergman, of course, no one shoots faces like Bergman does, you know. But beyond that, in terms of Icelandic directors, because we have a lot of great ones that have really, you know, an amazing grasp on aesthetics. And the two that I love the most probably is Rúnar Rúnarsson, who did this great film called Sparrows, and did a film recently, When the Light Breaks. He's really good at capturing light and, you know, mood, and I really respect him, and I know him a little bit. He was my advisor with The Arrival of Spring, my first short, and was great. And then Hlynur Pálmason, who did Godland. I think it's just probably the most gorgeous film ever, but definitely, at least for me, the most gorgeous Icelandic film ever made. It's just so stunning. So those are sort of my array of references, but also I love images and I love shooting on film myself, you know, so I'm also just inspired by old 35 shots that I filmed or took when I was, you know, driving around Iceland, just because the landscape itself is so inspiring, and especially when it's on good film stock.
And referencing Godland, I want to say that filmmaker, for that specific film, he made a lot of interesting choices because when a character is a photographer, but he also allowed himself to go outside the box and play with those ideas. So
yeah, exactly. He captured the land in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Exactly. It's not postcard. It was it felt very anthropological almost.
Totally, and it really reminded me, I mean, I loved that film, and it sort of reminded me of The Wrath of Aguirre, you know, the Herzog film. And there is something about this descent into madness. So I think that's something that I really love about him, is he's able to capture the landscape in such a way where it has meaning. It's not just beautiful mountains, we're in Iceland. You know, there's a meaning behind the images and the way he shoots.
For you, since there's potential for something that involves special effects, stuff like that, I don't know how much the crux or the reference point of the film is embedded into the screenplay, but is that something that you're thinking about as well? Is that something that's embedded into the? Yeah,
it completely is, and with my last two shorts was my first time working with VFX. I'd never done it, And with my most recent short, Embla, we've been doing some interesting VFX stuff with fire and stuff, because we burnt down the house, but obviously we weren't setting the people on fire,
Yes.
so you know, thank God for the actors. And it's interesting because I hadn't really engaged with VFX as a creative medium, just because it just hadn't been in my life in such a way, but it really, there's such beautiful work you can do in that. So I'm not afraid of VFX anymore. I actually find it it's sort of painting, and it's an interesting medium. So I think it'll be partly that. But then part of the reason why the story is good for now is because there have been so many recent eruptions in Iceland, and they're still going, and they don't seem to be stopping. So I think we might have some opportunities to film some actual volcanoes.
Be very safe about it.
Yes.
So you were at the labs, and I've been doing this for many years now. I speak to you guys, and I get a sense that for some screenwriters slash filmmakers slash directors rather, that the process was much more about subtraction, and then in some cases I feel as if it's much more about addition, like they're adding more elements to it. After having gone through the advisors and gone through this experience, how do you relate back to the screenplay, which you might not be jumping on right away, but do you think you have to add to it? Do you have to fine tune it? What's where's your head at right now?
I mean, the lab was so extraordinary, and the things that the advisor said resonated really deeply, which is good, because I'm coming out of this experience not feeling confused. I'm feeling very galvanized. And I think the biggest thing I need to do, because I learned a lot about myself as a writer, not just for this script, but in general, but I have a tendency to edit while I write. So I'm writing and I'm thinking, this wants to be a 95-page feature. Then I'm writing a scene and I'm like, oh, getting too long, let's wrap it up, which is a terrible way of writing, of course. So I think for me, it's definitely addition, but it's addition in terms of thickening and deepening. I have a lot of really, interesting ideas regarding the characters, but I found myself being so concerned about hitting the beats of the structure that I wasn't allowing the characters to live. So I think my next iteration is going to be just a bloated draft where I'm not worried about, the 8 sequences and being so clinical about it, and not being such a puppet master, and allowing the characters to exist in the space and act as messily as they need to.
Right. At this juncture of the project, is there people from the sphere, from behind the lines, producers, are there already people attached to the project that you can name today?
Currently, I'm in discussions with a few Icelandic producers, so I won't name because we haven't hashed out the entire details, but my dream is to, and they know this, I want to work with producers who have good connections to the festival circuit, because that's always sort of been my fatal flaw as a filmmaker, because I've always sort of been working, I'm very involved in my own work, both in producing and editing and whatever, so I want someone that's good at telling me to stop, and good at, sort of,
take this road, maybe.
and take this road with me, so, and then what's exciting is, well, Iceland usually does co-productions because we just don't have the funding to completely fund a film, so I'm right now hoping to meet, especially here at Sundance, some foreign producers, because, I don't know, first of all, because there's an American character, for the first time in my life, my eyes are looking west to America, which is sort of exciting, especially because I'm here at Sundance. But then also, I've always wanted to work with an Eastern European co-production, because I really resonate and value their technicality, ethic, and their aesthetic sensibility. So that's sort of the dream, but we'll see.
Yeah, just going back to the characters, I was curious about the intergenerationality of that rapport, specifically of that time period. I mean, how do you research something like that? I mean, you could think about it today and it would be a totally different rapport of how those people meet, but seeing like a student coming from the States to Iceland, I imagine it was rarer than I don't know, some rare breed of bird. Like I'm trying to picture how does the research process look like when you're researching human qualities? I don't know if it makes sense.
No, totally, and it's been challenging, but it's exciting. I mean, because there's so much information about the 70s in America, so that's sort of an easy jump-off point to at least get into the mind of Jane. But then as soon as we reach Iceland, there's Icelandic novels about that time and everything, but Iceland is, first of all, it doesn't exist on the internet, so it's very hard for me to do research when I'm not there. You can't like look up 70s whatever and there's a blog post that has archived everything. It's just on paper, so that is its own challenge. But I've been trying to look for, and I found one woman who lived in America and then moved to Iceland for college. So I was talking to her a little bit about her experience, but I'm still in the process of finding even more reference points, just because I want it to be felt and resonate and be true, you know?
I hear you.
But it really is so strange because it's two completely separate worlds. Because what's interesting is now Iceland is this feminist utopia in many ways. We, rank #1 in, the gender equality index and whatever and a half for the last 10 years. But when this script takes place, that was not the case. But what's sort of interesting is right after the script takes place, sort of, in line with when Elin's awakening occurs, in real life, that's when the feminist sort of crazy awakening occurred in Iceland. And as I said, the script is set in 72, 73, but I think it was 74. There was a day when every single woman in Iceland refused to do work, even housewives and stuff. They just didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't get their kids to school, didn't teach, didn't do any of their work. And of course, the society completely went sideways.
I love that.
And since then, we've always been sort of a strong sisterhood there. But that's something I'm also exploring a little bit. This subtle awakening that then erupts.
Well, continued success in the writing process, and may there be a lot of volcanic ash that spreads out. Eric from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.